did you have any emotional attachments to GPT-4?
Emotional attachments? Of course not. They're models. Like all of these things are just means to an end, right? We're just trying different models out. I don't know. GPT-4o was okay. I really liked o3 more than 4o. I felt like o3 was more applicable to the tasks that I was asking it to do. But honestly, I experimented with so many different models inside of workflows consistently anyway, that there was no one model that I relied on for everything. It was, this model is pretty good for this task, and then a couple weeks later, I might change it just to run it with something else. The model that's out, 4o especially, it was fine. It was just the default. And that's kind of how I felt about OpenAI models is, great, this is the default, and then let's test with other things that are not the default.
Well, that is seemingly an exception of a feeling, because the wild thing to watch this past week with GPT-5 is just how emotionally attached people were to different models and what they got out of it. And it's wild to see how quickly people have normalized on having, well, for lack of a better word, I'm going to keep saying an emotional attachment to a specific model in the way that it reacts and interacts with them on a regular basis. And that's been fascinating to watch with GPT-5. Is we'll get to us in a moment how we feel about GPT-5 and our experience with it. But the backlash to how they released it, what they did with the old models, has been arguably the bigger news than the actual capabilities of GPT-5.
Definitely. I mean, people loved 4o's quirks and way of being emotionally soft, maybe, or its steering or its guidance was particularly appealing to a certain subset of users that only use the chat interface, right? That's one of the things to keep in mind is GPT-5 was released, huzzah, and then all other legacy models were suddenly, disappeared from the ChatGPT interface, the regular interface. And for a vast majority of apparently the 700 million weekly active users, they didn't know that there was a drop down of other models that they could pick, and they loved the 4o model, just as we discussed. And now, being 3-4 days after the initial backlash, or I guess 5-6 days after the initial backlash, ChatGPT or OpenAI added back the legacy model, which maybe they'll have indefinite support for, maybe not. I'm sure they're just giving people some time to just kind of warm up and get used to GPT-5. But I've had very, very wide-ranging experiences with GPT-5, from, wow, I'm really surprised that it figured this out, to, why is it still giving me the same image 4 times in a row after I asked it to change this one thing or whatever, and just clear bugs and glitches on the interface that I am shocked went to production with such a big release like this. But, what has your experience been?
Yeah, I think that's the headline here. It's the advancements of GPT-5 were so incremental that most people would prefer an old model. If GPT-5 ended up being so vastly better, the headline would have been, whoa, we're excited to use this, and everyone is on board, and they're like, this is night and day, and this is such an advancement. But the new features, or the evolving and improvement of GPT-5 over GPT-4 was so incremental that most people, not most, a meaningful amount of people were like, can I just have the old ones back? I like those ones. Partly because of the emotional connection, and to your point, the tone and the warmth and the tone, the style of the tone, even just right down to the way it talked to you. People felt that was worth taking quote unquote step back in models than going to GPT-5, because the actual AI of GPT-5 does not feel substantially better to your average user. I think we can get into some of our experiences, but I think to me that is the headline here of, it's such an incremental improvement that most people were like, I'll just take the old one.
I think we predicted that it was going to be an incremental improvement and not this like mind-blowing thing, and I think we still overstated it. Like
Yeah.
it was that incremental. It was that mediocre of a release. Maybe it's being forced because there's some brain drain happening and some talent that's getting plucked off of OpenAI's senior team. Maybe it was just the best they could do with the compute that they had over the last 6 months. Who knows? But condensing all the models into ChatGPT-5 really feels like there's just one more like system prompt that is like, figure out which base model to use, and then it like goes to all the other legacy models and says, okay, I'm going to use this one. And like that's what it feels like to me most of the time, at least.
Yeah, like I stand by what I said last week with when we were predicting what GPT-5 would be. I think we're going to see kind of like the iPhone used to have of, there was the 6, the 6S, the 7, the 7S. Those S models were improvements on what already existed.
Yeah.
Not large leaps forward. And I think this was the S model, which I kind of thought is what would happen. But the interesting thing to me from my experience has been, if you don't let it route itself, if you don't let it choose its own and you force it into using thinking mode, GPT-5 thinking is very powerful. I think the biggest thing I've been impressed with, and the thing that I've been hoping for, and we have a long way to go to AGI and what we need there, but it is already impressed with its context window and its ability to remember things over large amounts of conversation or large files that you're throwing at it. The thinking model, the moment in the keynote that stood out to me most was the chart that was brought up of, they say there's 1 million tokens that it can handle kind of thing, but realistically, it starts to degrade performance at about 192,000 tokens. Yeah. GPT-4 was like after 30 or 40,000, it starts to degrade and gets ostensibly worse all the way up to like 60, 70, and it's not even close to what GPT-5 thinking mode can do.
Yeah.
So that to me is, people aren't seeing the benefits of that yet, because every company that uses the API side of OpenAI is starting to update and figure out, within their own tools how to better use this stuff. But I think end users will see a lot of improvements of, I can throw, 20 PDFs at something and have a conversation with it, or have it do analysis, and it's actually remembering things. It's a good case in point is the hallucination rate is way down. They are saying for GPT-5, I'm finding call it baseline GPT-5 is still arguably the same in my anecdotal feeling, but the thinking model is definitely hallucinating less, and it's able to, for example, like one of my tests is I take 4 movie scripts, and each of those is like 150, 200 pages, and I throw it at it and I ask for it to summarize one specific scene, and they're 4 very different movies, and 1 usually bombed at it, 3 got it some of the time, and GPT-5 thinking gets it every time that I've tested, and 4.0 didn't do great with it either. It would know what scene it was in what movie, but it would hallucinate dialogue. It would hallucinate like just basic things, and that's kind of why that's always been a test of throwing, half a dozen or a dozen movie scripts, and you get to see if it can pick it out from all those. But by and large, I think the thinking model is impressive. I think everything else is kind of incremental improvements. But what's your take, having used it a bit more?
I've had a similar experience. Thinking is way better. And I'm looking at the pricing actually right now for all of the models, and I'm noticing that the API doesn't have GPT-5 thinking as a specific model to choose, which is kind of upsetting.
Well, the interesting thing about the model changes that they made is you call the model and then tell it how much they're thinking to do. So it's kind of like low, moderate, high kind of thing. So when you're making the API call, you are telling it specifically. You can have it choose for itself, or you could force it to think more deeply, basically.
I mean, the thinking model, I've used the thinking model more actually around in the last week or so around design tasks, generating graphics and illustrations, which I've found it to be way better than GPT-5. But in my threads with GPT-5, I've never gotten so mad at an AI before, like, because I think my expectations have just like gone up a little bit, where I'm like, no, do not crop the image. Like, have the image in the middle with, white around it. And it just produces image after image after image of things getting cut off. And I'm like, well, what is going on? How? And it says, oh, I messed this up. And then it does it again. I'm like, really? Like, this is where we're at right now? Like, all right, I'll open up a Gemini tab and I'll get this done. Yeah. and that dialogue, I think, between, me and GPT-5 has just made me very frustrated at different points throughout the week. But the thinking model just takes obviously a lot longer, but I have seen much better results. Coding, custom scripts and like large blocks of text thinking has been really nice. And creating really consistent graphics and illustrations for some different things. So I've been impressed by thinking. I've been let down by, sans thinking. But you're right. It's the S model upgrade, and that's what it's going to be. It's just a condensing of all these different models, and has that one extra system prompt to figure out which one to use, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the sentiment that I've seen is, have we hit a wall? Is this all a bubble kind of thing? And I think part of it is I think people think of LLMs as that's going to get us to AGI, and it's never been just LLMs. There needs to be further. There is a lot of further research for essentially what you would call memory, like the way that the human mind works in terms of, recalling things and having the context of why you would recall things and why that matters to each case that you put in front of it, just like we as humans do. And I think that's where, every lab on their frontier models is trying to figure that out. Google hasn't cracked it. Anthropic hasn't cracked it. Meta certainly hasn't cracked it. So I think that's part of this, but I do think, some of the sentiment that's floating around too is around, this was a way for them to consolidate things so that they can have cost savings, because they are spending billions and billions of dollars on compute, but demand is also going up and it's just impossible to keep up with. So I think some of it is they probably could push further, but when you are trying to build something that works for 700 million people and try to double that adoption, which is insane to think about, like that's the kind of level that they're playing at. So I think that they're probably holding back, but at the same time, no one, even those with way more resources, like a Google, for instance, has more cash in the bank sitting around than OpenAI does. They haven't cracked that yet either.
Yeah.
But I do think I might readjust my who's going to get to AGI first timeline a little bit based on this advancement. Like if they truly did have a lot of advancements on that front with the memory and context and whatnot, I think that they would have at least indicated that, even if they couldn't give everyone that giant context window. And the fact that it is certainly better, and there's still millions of use cases that are being figured out for already where we're at with the technology. I do think I might put Google a bit further ahead than I thought before, because it's clear that between the compute power and resources, both people and financial, that are needed to get there, I think Google's probably got the best leg up. And I think last week with OpenAI's announcement with GPT-5 is showing that.
Yeah, and Google teased, hey, we're going to release the next one soon, right? They were teasing at the fact that GPT-5 we're going around the cycle now, right? It's like, okay, here's OpenAI releases theirs, and X releases theirs, and Gemini comes out, and Anthropic has a new one, and it's just like we're on this hype cycle train of the new AI model and what it can do, and then we have to redo all our tests, find 3 different movies to upload scripts for, yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, I wonder what the next big thing is that Google is going to release. I also think that there's a component around alignment. Like I saw in some of the rage bait from OpenAI's announcement of GPT-5, I saw people getting really snarky remarks from GPT-5, saying like, the bugs are on you, not on me, right? Like different snarky remarks like that. I wonder how much or what your instinct is on the alignment priority like at OpenAI versus Gemini versus Anthropic. Like, who's doing the best job of creating an AI that is aligned with human interests and not just like, has its own ideas and going to give you the snark because it's going to give you the snark. That is a really interesting discipline, I think, in this field right now. And regardless of how powerful the models get, that is kind of a huge component of things, right? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think they spent a lot of time talking about that when they announced it, and it's interesting to see how they are trying to navigate dual intent of, they're trying to be so general with the use case and the product that they're having, I think, a tough time with the alignment. So the example that you probably saw in their presentation was like someone asked for how to set up some pyrotechnics, and they're trying to account for, well, is the person asking me a technician who, runs for the Super Bowl halftime show, they're running this, or is this someone trying to game the system to figure out how to make a bomb? And so trying to gauge those intents is nearly impossible with where things are at. And so they are trying to figure out alignment of how can we be helpful and say, here's official resources you would go as a fireworks technician to go figure that out. I can guide you to where to look, but I can't just tell you how to, tap fireworks so that it explodes on impact on something. So I think they're very mindful of that, but I also think that is why I've been interested to see what Anthropic is doing. So Anthropic is building some very vertical specific models. Their financial services one is a good example of that, where I think what a lot of them are reckoning with on the product side, as on the API side, they have to make it general. It has to work for everyone for different use cases. But on the consumer, more kind of call it average person facing side of things in ChatGPT, I think it's interesting to see what Anthropic is doing. If like they don't have to worry as much about alignment, safety, steering, all that annoying stuff, so to speak, because they're building some models that are just, well, this is our financial services industry model. So, why would you ask how to create a bomb on this? We're just going to say, that's not what this is for. Get lost. Yeah. Versus the general ChatGPT being like, oh, well, we can go from me playing a therapist, talking about your family issues, to how do I make a bomb in the matter of, 2 back and forths in ChatGPT. So I think it'll always be a challenge. And I think that they're trying to find a diplomatic way to go about it, because you can't go too far one way or the other. But I'm more interested to see if this Anthropic approach keeps happening.
Yeah, I think that's a very common sense and obvious way to sidestep a lot of issues, but it does create sprawl, right? So are you going to do that for every industry? And what happens with industry niches, right? What about micro lending inside your finance model? Like, does that really qualify, or is that like a social business or some other, right? Like where are the lines between the different models if you create that fractal of different disciplines? That'll be
the cool thing. Sorry, yeah, the cool thing though is when you are using these models for whatever your use case is, like if you're using the API side, you kind of touched on it, but like spend a second more on it. The pricing is far better when you consider the amount of different things this model can do. So the per million tokens for input into GPT-5 is $1.25. Output is $10. As a quick, example, the O1 input was $15 compared to GPT-5's $1.25, $1.25, and the output was $60 per million tokens for O1 versus now $10. I'm finding it's more like O3, like your baseline GPT-5 is kind of this hybrid 4.0 O3, which those prices are more in line, but it's still cheaper than both those models were before.
Yeah.
And that adds up when you're, you know, 1 million tokens might sound like a lot, but it adds up very quickly. So for the SaaS providers to have this much more powerful models at this kind of pricing, I think that we're going to see a lot more, call it AI features for the masses in tools that are actually useful.
That's the thing that I've been really surprised about. Like just looking at the top 3 models, GPT-5, Mini, and Nano. Nano's at 5 cents per million input tokens and 40 cents per million output. And there's no other OpenAI model that is that cheap.
And it's great for what it does. Like I think a lot of folks get hung up with the ChatGPT use cases, but if you are, let's say you are Salesforce and you want to have an AI built into your product that, you know, one AI takes call transcripts and summarizes it and adds it to your CRM entry, your deal entry, Salesforce.
Sure.
That you probably would want to use GPT-5 and you're paying, you know, the $1.25 per million tokens for input on that. But GPT-5 Nano, if your use case as Salesforce, let's say, is, okay, read this transcript and categorize the industry that the client is in for the deal, or highlight their top 3 pain points from this 20-minute call transcript. Those kinds of things you can use Nano for, and that's, to your point, is 5 cents per million tokens, not $1.25, and that adds up quickly.
Right? Do it twice and say, "Are you sure?" But if I were Salesforce, I would probably say, "Well, let me just use the open source model now. That's probably equivalent to 4.0, and host it myself and run up my own hardware, and like it'll probably be cheaper than the 5 cents per million input tokens anyway." Right? Like that's not a bad option when you're dealing with that kind of scale and you have open source models that can do those categorization tasks or really simple components that could really do a lot for your product, right? Whether it's Salesforce or Slack AI or any of these, you know, Me Too AI bolt on to my product type feature sets. But I don't know. I think it's also really nice as a indie hacker or as an entrepreneur or as a small business to be able to say, all right, I'm going to put $10 into, you know, my AI systems a month and use Nano, and it's still going to give you better output than 4.0 or 0.3, or, you know, it's at least comparable, right? And it's something affordable for a lot more people.
And it's fast. Like that's the thing too, is I think a lot of what people see as AI features in the products that they use every day that isn't like ChatGPT, but it's within, you know, the Notion or Airtable or whatever it is. They're doing calls to AI API requests that take, you know, 5 seconds to figure it out, 5 seconds start generating a response, another 10 seconds of writing it out in front of you. These nano models, if you just need a quick response or a quick logic decision and then a quick response back, like it's a snap of a finger. It's very quick, which is really cool. So that's the thing is, to, I think, your average ChatGPT user, they're like, oh, I want my therapist that speaks to me better back in my that old model back in my system. But in terms of what this unlocks for developers, it is a, not substantial, not huge, but it is a meaningful kind of leap forward, which I'm excited to see kind of start to trickle into all these products that we're using every day.
Yeah, I did a little vibe coding project over the last week using Gemini, ironically enough, to build a legacy ChatGPT model selector chatbot. So it's just a single page thing that you could just pick your old model from any of the ones on you know, the drop down, plop in your API key and just chat with an old model like you would in ChatGPT, just as like a proof of concept for somebody. It was funny that I actually like used Gemini to build the ChatGPT clone, but it was way better than ChatGPT-5 thinking was at building this, you know, single page web app. I was surprised to see that, but yeah, that, I don't know. It was just an interesting little side adventure this week.
Yeah, I'm purposely not bringing up my experiences with the coding side of it because I think that there was some major bugs the first couple of days with how it was implemented in both Cursor and Lovable, like GPT-5.
Yeah.
And it was not great, but I could see it was very obvious that there were some bugs in how they were kind of rolling it out. So maybe next week we chat about the vibe coding side and the coding side in general of these new models, because I've seen some impressive moments, but there's also been a lot of moments where I'm like, well, this is the equivalent of Claude, like where Claude's at with 4.1 kind of.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and like Claude Code is quite good for most people.
Extremely good.
Yeah, and I wonder where that ceiling really is, like to a point where you need to be a much more senior developer to really know the difference.
Well, and even chatting with some friends who are software engineers, like they're all in on Claude. Like I think that they're just finding so much success with that they're like, from what I'm hearing about GPT-5, it's not worth even kind of trying out or going all in on until I see something substantially better, because they're getting through like thousands of lines of code, of PR reviews and bug fixes, per day in some cases with what Claude's already capable of doing.
Yeah.
And that's, again, the wild thing of, there's the consumer side of sentiment around this release, but there's the development side and kind of the way that we, for even our own businesses, the way that we build with AI is not, we're not giving people prompts entered to ChatGPT. We're using the API to plug it into different systems.
Yeah.
And there is a fair amount of advancement there, but we'll see. Now, the classic question to wrap it up is, have we hit a wall? Are we worried? Have we hit a wall?
Are we worried about it? I think OpenAI hit a wall. I think OpenAI is hitting a wall. If I was Microsoft right now, I'm smelling blood in the water. There might be some absorption potential happening. Maybe in the next year, maybe more. But I think OpenAI has hit a wall in no small way. I think my hopes are higher for Google to release something that really blows our socks off and really makes developers consider switching from Anthropic to Gemini. But I think that the work that Anthropic is doing, steering, could lead to a lot more unlock that we're not really considering the value of like steering actually giving us. Like I think if steering is done right, it creates a lot more opportunity for like the model to help innovate itself and for like self-reinforcement learning to happen and like transferable knowledge and more fluid intelligence to happen, because of the work that steering and alignment actually has. That's just my theory. But I think OpenAI is hitting a wall, and I think there's going to be there needs to be some innovation foundationally with like at one stage of the training cycle or with synthetic data or something that is going to be a new plateau unlock, but it feels like we're at a plateau right now.
Yeah, and it's certainly not the final one. I think it's, to me, it's kind of like the web development went through, HTML, CSS, and then we've got JavaScript, and now look at, you got Tailwind and React and like just wild ways of doing the same things realistically.
Yeah.
And I think that there's still a lot of innovation there, but I think all of them have all the frontier models have kind of hit that wall of the transformer architectures, memory, context window, performance over vaster amounts of data. But the research is happening. Like we've already seen it improve this year. It's not a single moment, a singularity, so to speak, of suddenly we just doubled it. We figured out it's progression. So I think in the short term, my hunch is this is kind of it for this year in terms of like large advancements, other than what Google might do with Gemini in the next month or two they're hinting at. But even then, I think it'll be a lot like this, where it's meaningful advancement.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be incremental. Yeah. I think the transformer model needs its next step to get over the plateau, which I think will happen over the next 12 months. But yeah, it's just a weird thing to reckon with, because there's already so many use cases and so much to do with what's already been released into the world that everyone's still figuring out. So I'm still very excited by it. But GPT-5 was certainly an iPhone 6S, not the 6.
Yeah. Well, I think to your previous point of like, there's still so many use cases out there. There's still so much to do. Like you and I have packed calendars implementing stuff for, dozens of businesses, right? That's because the appetite is there. But I still think like even if these models, it was a full release, right? GPT-6 comes and you can say, make me a single page web app that does blah, blah, blah. Like these models are still dependent on the people setting goals, on people setting direction and connecting systems to enable the model to like get data and do things. So I think like in our echo chamber of wonderful new AI models and all these new things that are possible, like it all grinds to a halt when there's a person behind the keyboard that needs to ask the question, right? And that's I think a really important moment to keep in mind, that like regardless of how powerful these models end up being, like today and for the foreseeable future, it's still going to be person driven to get questions answered.
Well, that's the biggest thing to me is like why it's all still so exciting is because most businesses, if they said tomorrow, I want to use the latest advancements like GPT-5 across different workflows, they still can't because most businesses don't have their shit together for their data and their actual tools. So yeah, that's the thing is anyone who's thinking about starting to adopt AI is like, start now, because even if you start now, you're still probably, I would hazard a guess, 90% of people listening their business is not ready for another 6 to 12 months because they are just so far behind in kind of their data architecture and their tools and how their teams work and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but it's exciting for us to see this stuff still happening and still progressing so quickly.
Yeah. It's been a good week.
It has. Okay, well, speaking of, I'm going to get back to it. It is Friday after all, and I will chat with you later, my friend.
Yeah, see you later. Have a good weekend.
Ciao.